Okay, so welcome. We just have a few people today, but that's all right. We'll go ahead and get started in just a second once I get everything set up. So I'm working out of my yurt today, and I hope my network will be good enough. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. I want to make sure I have my chat up and so that I can see any comments or questions. Okay, welcome, Samia. There we go. Now I've got the nice thing about working from here in my home office is that I have multiple screens. The not so nice things is sometimes the network can be flaky. All right, let's go ahead and close that down. Okay, so today we are going to take a step back. Last week we had some trouble accessing the test APIs, but today we're going to introduce Pytest. And Pytest is the test runner tool for Python. It is similar to JUnit or comparable in terms of functionality. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing you need to do to install Pytest is just do pip install Pytest. If you have Python, well, I don't want to install Python. I want to install Pytest. So we'll install Pytest, and that should just take a few seconds. And then we'll go ahead and start by writing our first test with Pytest. Now, there are several different test runners in Python, just like there are several different test runners in other languages like Java, might have JUnit and TestNG, and JavaScript might have Mocha or Jasmine or other things like that. Ruby has RSpec and unit test. There's also a unit test in Python. In Python, there's a doc test where you can actually write documentation in your class. And I thought about covering doc test, but we're probably not going to use that. We may have kind of a sidebar on doc test in the future because it's kind of nice to write your simple tests in line with your code that document your function and show examples. But anyway, let's forget about that for now and use Pytest. Now, we talked last week about using Pycharm. I downloaded it, but I haven't got it installed yet. So let me go through the installation of Pycharm. Pretty much once you've downloaded Pycharm from JetBrains website, you just, on a Mac, you just drag and drop it and go through the installer. And then once that's going, I can go ahead and go to my launcher and type Pycharm. And I have the Pycharm Community Edition. I'm not sure of the feature difference between the community and the professional version. Hey, Samia. All right. It's application downloaded from the internet.
Hey, how
are you doing? We're just getting started. So I'm installing Pycharm IDE since the majority of the class wanted to see that. Personally, I like working from the command line and using simple tools with Python. But I'll bow to the majority demand. We're going to get started at first with so Pytest, once it's installed, you invoke it with Pytest from the command line, or you create some tests in your folder. So let's go ahead and make a directory called tests. And I promise we'll get to that in the future. And then to create tests in Python, I'm just going to create something called first test, first test.py. Now, there's a few conventions that help Pytest out. Number one is that that file names should start or end with test, like first test or test first, whatever. Test methods should start with test underscore. So we'll call it test addition. So I want my function name or method name to start with test underscore. And then what I would do is I just use assertions, the assertion library. So I'm going to do 1 plus 2 is equal, or 1 plus 3, we'll say, is equal to 4. And that's pretty much it for the start. So now I can do Pytest, and I can do the folder, and it'll run all my tests in here. I can create another test. Let's call it second test.py, and I'll create another function. Remember, def stands for define function. I'll do this a subtraction test. And then I'll do something like 4 minus 3 equals, let's make this wrong. So this one will fail. And what I want to do is assert 4 minus 3 equals 2, and I'll space that out to make it easier to read. All right, so now we have this. I'm going to do Pytest on this folder. I run 2 tests. I have a single equal sign. That's assignment, not equality comparison. So just a syntax error. Let's try this again. Pytest on my tests folder, and you can see that it says 1 passed. It should have said 1 failed. What did I do wrong? Oh, it doesn't start. I need it to start with test for it to auto find it. Test subtraction, not end with test. All right. So now I can do Pytest tests. I'll run it on a clean screen so you can see it. You can see first test has this green dot. I'll make that a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. The second test has a nice red F for failure. And it shows which test failed, test subtraction, and it shows what my assertion was that failed and what it's expecting, E for expecting. Assert 4 minus 3 to be equal to 2. That's obviously not true, and so it failed. We can correct that by editing this test to say 4 minus 3 is equal to 1. And then we can run those tests again. Now, you can also do LF, which means run only the last ones that failed. Oops. File not found. All right. I need to look this up. Oh, there we go. It's -- with no spaces. Took me a couple tries to type that in right. So you can see it only ran the second test, and that passed this time. If I do Pytest LF for last failure, no known failures, so it ran them all. So that's kind of the convention of just starting simple tests with Pytest. Have you guys been able to just do pip install Pytest and follow along to create a test? Please type down the app name. Yes, Divya, you can record yourself. I'm actually recording this time. At least this little blinking red dot tells me I am. But what do you mean, Divya?
Thank you, Aaron. That's the only thing. I just want to record the session for the future reference. So will you provide the recording session to us?
Yes, I will. I will upload it to YouTube at the end. But I think if your Zoom client allows you to record as well, I'm sure you can record it for your own personal use. That way you don't have to download it again.
Okay.
I'm not sure how that works, if it'll allow you to do that.
Apologies, I have joined 5 minutes later before your session. I would say like you have started 9:30.
Okay. So probably all you missed was pip install Pytest, and then going through the installation process for the Pycharm IDE from JetBrains. We've just introduced Pytest as a tool to be run from the command line, and we created our first very simple test. So I'm going to go ahead and go through the rest of the setup. So let me see, set my UI theme. I like dark background, less glare. If you like light, you can choose that. Let's see, customize Pycharm, create script for opening files and projects from the command line. Yeah, I want to be able to do that. I'm going to forget that, so I'm going to call it Pycharm. Featured plugins. I could create a Vim emulator. Why bother? Use Vim if you've got Vim. Let's go ahead and start using, well, let's see. This AWS toolkit looks like something I might want to explore in the future. But let's go ahead and start using Pycharm. Now, I've never used Pycharm. I've used IntelliJ. So this is going to be a bit of an experiment for me. I imagine running regular Python code or creating modules isn't going to be very unusual. But I'm not sure how to run Pytest through Pycharm, so you might watch me Googling things. Okay, so here's something interesting. When you use Python, when you create a new project, a typical thing to do is to create a virtual environment. The reason is that you can choose which version of Python. You can choose 3.8.2 or 3.7.3 or whatever version of Python you want. And you can also isolate the number of external packages. Like if we're just using requests and Pytests, we don't have to filter through all of our requirements. So when you do pip freeze, this will save all your files. And this is typically how you generate a list of your dependencies. You can see in my global Python scope, I have a ton of dependencies, right? And just one of those happens to be Pytest, and one of those happens to be requests. For today's exercise, I don't even know if we'll get to using requests again today. We're just going to use Pytest. And so if I'm creating an API test and all I'm using is Pytest and requests, I don't want to do pip freeze into requirements.txt. And this is the way you save all your dependencies. It's similar to a gem file in Ruby or your list of dependencies in your Maven pom.xml. But now when I look at my requirements.txt, I have all of these things, and I want to go through and delete all the ones I'm not using. Oh my goodness, I'm not even going to worry about that. I'm just going to delete that requirements.txt. Now, I don't want to get into PyEnv right now, but what PyEnv does is it allows you to create an isolated workspace that only has the necessary dependencies for your project for that version of Python. So this is what this is interesting doing. Pycharm is doing a good standard Python practice of creating a virtual environment for a project, and it'll give you this VM folder, and it's telling you the base interpreter. It has 3.7, even though I have 3.8.2 installed locally somewhere. That's close enough for now. This is probably the version either installed with Python or Homebrew, maybe it detected this. I can go into here and get a different Python interpreter. Let me figure out. So if I do Python -V for version on the command line, it says Python 3.8.2, that's good. So I'm gonna do which Python. Where am I getting this Python? Okay, so it's under PyEnv, which is a utility for installing different versions of Pythons. So if I do user local bin Python -version, maybe it's user local Python bin. Where is it saying this is coming from? User local bin, oh, Python 3.7. User local bin, no, I just want to see the ones. So I have Python 3, Python 3.7, and it doesn't even have Python. So, but if I do Python 3, it's going to be 3.7. I'm not sure I have this in where I got this one and user local bin, but it's 374. Probably through a homebrew install when I went brew install Python 3 at some point in the past. Maybe that was last week. And that's good enough for now. But if I wanted to change it, I could grab this version here and specify my Python interpreter. And then you can see the Python I'm going to use is this one, and it'll switch when I change my virtual environment. So that's probably not a really good practice. Yeah, so this Python 3 came from Homebrew. All right, so I'm going to stick with Python 3.7. That's recent enough for practically anything. And so it's going to create a virtual environment. It's going to use Python 3.7. If I use that pyenv shim and I change my pyenv, if I do pyenv use 3.7 or what is it, pyenv local 3.7, not installed. I think I got 3.4. Nope. Okay, never mind. What I'm saying is if I switch this to use that version of Python, let me go ahead and start this over just so it's clear. Okay, so I'm going to use the user local bin Python that's in that path. Because if I use my shim for Python from pyenv and I change pyenv, it'll change out from underneath this project, and I don't want to do that. All right, so there's options to inherit global packages, make available to all projects. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to take the default 3.7. It's worth looking at this because if you get used to accepting the defaults and you never find out what the options for changing are, you could be months down the line and scratching your head wondering, well, how do I use a different virtual environment with Python? And you see here right at the start of a new project, it's showing you how to do that. Now it's not letting me create existing interpreter. Okay. Okay, so I can specify a specific one here. But I want to use the user local bin interpreter. Oh, there we go. So that's actually extra handy. I can choose from my existing virtual environments. I can use Conda, which I use for the data science course tomorrow, or I can use the system interpreter here. And you can see there's user bin Python 2. So multiple different versions here. We'll stick with this one since that's the base interpreter. And then there's pipenv, which is like virtual environments, but we won't go into that today. So we've got here the system interpreter. There we go, 3.7. Let's go ahead and create our project and get going. All right, so it said preparing my workspace. I need to drag it over here and resize. Samia, you don't need to download Pycharm Professional. Community is fine. That's all I'm using at least. Here's the tips. It's worth reading the tips on startup. I'll do that someday. Okay, so we've got here our intro to Pytest. Let's go ahead and try and create a new Python file. So what I want to do is, let's see, it allows me to create a unit test, but I don't want a unit test. Let's look at unit test. I think it's probably going to show that it extends unit test. I'll have to retitle this course Exploring Pycharm. Yeah, so import unit test, my class extends unit test test case. So this is what unit test looks like compared to Pytest. We don't want that. We want a Pytest. So we're going to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give us an assignment to create a function. It's called share. All right. So here's what I want share to do. I'm a dad, and so oftentimes when I have a treat, I need to divide it up. I say I have a box of candies, and I need to divide it up between my children equitably, because if one child gets more candy than the other, then they'll start to complain. So so what I'm going to do is I'm going to define what I want this to do. We're going to implement it and write tests to make sure we implemented it correctly. So what do I want to do? I want to return the portion size and well, let's not jump ahead. I just want to start off returning the portion size, right? So what I want to do is I want to divide a quantity into equal portions. And that's a good start, right? So what I need to do that is I need a quantity. I will call it Q for quantity. So how would we go about doing this? Well, that seems pretty easy. I'm going to need to divide the quantity by the portion size. So I'll give them better names. Quantity by portions, by the number of portions. So I need two variables here, right? I need to know how many pieces of candy I have and how many kids I have, the number of portions I'm dividing it into. So does this look like a pretty good solution? Maybe if I spell it correctly, it'll look even better. All right. Now, I'm going to write some tests, and I'm just going to include them in the same file for convenience right now. So I got to remember, it's test underscore, not underscore test, as I commonly do in Java. So test share. And this is going to be iteration 1. So what I want to do is I want to assert that that share, say I have 10 pieces and 3 children, or let's make it easier. I have 10 pieces and 2 children for now. Assert that divided 10 pieces of candy between 2 kids should equal 5, right? Let's go ahead and run this test. So I'm not even sure how to run this from here. We're going to Google it. So, but I'm going to run it from the command line really quickly by going to this directory. All right. So now I've got share. So I can do pytest share.py. That succeeded. All right. So pretty simple, right? Let's do our next test. Say I have 3 kids. I need to divide this up into 3 portions. Now, we're going to get a remainder. But these are hard candies. I can't divide them up. So that fails because 3.33335 doesn't equal 3. So I want to specify here in my documentation whole numbers. What do I need to do to solve that? Well, I can do this. I can do math.round, but not capital math, lowercase math. All right. And then I'll need to import math here. Math is a built-in module or library for Python. Now it's time to Google. How do I run a Pytest? How to run Pytest with Pycharm. Pycharm supports Pytest. Enable open settings preference tools Python. Python preference, oh, I might actually need to go here to, we'll just search. I'm not like most men, you can ask my wife. I am perfectly fine to ask for directions or instructions, but then I ignore them and try and figure it out on my own. All right. Python integrated tools. Let's go with default runner is Pytest. All right, so let's then supports Pytest, dedicated test runner, completion for test, code navigation, support for Python 2.3.5, Python integrated tools, default runner, check Pytest, got that. Create a test, create a Python project from the main menu, file, new Python, copy and paste the car sample into car py. Well, we don't, from the main menu, navigate test. Let's bring these back. Oh, here we go. Now it has my familiar arrows from JUnit in IntelliJ. So I can run this test. I would like to run it. Oh, there we go. Test framework quit unexpectedly. No module named Pytest. All right, I know why this is. Because I didn't install Pytest in this Python version. User local bin, pip3, install Pytest. So Pycharm definitely doesn't do the heavy work for you. Let's figure out something else. How to import modules, Pycharm. File settings, project interpreter. If you have a virtual environment, how do I import modules? Add in file settings, project setting, project interpreter. Well, you don't know the path because you didn't read that pop-up. File settings, project structure, add content root. File, there's no settings. Project structure, add content root. So
I think you need to go for the Python.
all right, someone figured this out? I hear some talking.
Yeah, you need to go for project structure, I think, because those specified things for
structure. Here we go.
Python, click on the Python. Oh no, click on the
Add
Python.
content root.
After that Apple symbol, black symbol, in the menu, go to the Python. Top.
Okay, so now I've got structure, modules, and dependencies. New, no.
Go for that Pycharm next to file edit in the top.
File, yeah, here.
I think go for preferences.
Preferences.
Yeah, here you go. That project.
Okay.
Next, you go for appearance and behavior. Project the project intro to Pytest your project next to version control, below the version control. Come down.
Oh, project. Okay, yeah, there we go. Project structure. Thank you. All right. What do we do in project structure? Add content root. Add content root.
Yes, there is a plus. Yes.
So I guess this could point me to a directory. I'm still not sure what to do for here. Like I could have a directory like this could be my site modules directory, I guess. But I'm gonna guess that because I installed Pytest with the version of the interpreter here, that it's going to work from the command line. Or it's going to work because I fixed it from the command line. So let's try this. There we go, launching Pytest. Okay, that did work. Okay, so I've got assert share 10.2 equals 5. Attribute error. Oh, because I changed. Math has no round. Okay. I agree. Disagree. Maybe it's just round. Okay, it's just round. I was probably thinking of math floor, but let's go ahead and run this now. Share 3 portions, okay. So that works, but I'm not getting all the output that I want. I don't want to mess with that. I'm going to hop back over here, and I'm going to do Pytest-V for verbose output. Both of those passed. I guess this is just verbose output saying that it passed. So what I want instead of rounding though is I wanted math.floor, which will round down in case my remainder is greater than 1/2. I'm trying to think of an example where that could happen. Does anyone even have a combination of numbers where that's going to happen? Test. So if I divide something that's going to end in 6.666, what if I'm having a math weekday? So if I do 20 divided by 3, that's going to be 666. That's what I thought. Okay. All right. So assert share 20 into 3 portions equals, that's supposed to be 6, right? And it's just supposed to leave the remainder behind. Kind of gave away my deal there. And then I'm going to run this test here. And for sanity, I'm also going to run it from here. So I have 2 passed and 1 failed on the share larger fraction because rounds up when it's greater than 1.5. Expected 6, actual 7. So that's what I wanted to show is what I want to actually do is I want to do math.floor here. Now I should have all 3 tests pass And then when I do this, I get that. All right. So those all pass there. But what I actually want to do is I want to divide these up, and if there's a remainder, like Richard Pryor in Superman 3, I want to keep the fraction for myself because I like candy too. So what I want to do is I want to divide a quantity into equal portions and return the portion size and the remainder. So how are we going to go about do that? I'm going to use a tuple. Now a tuple is essentially an ordered list that's associated with things. You can think of it as like a row in the database is a tuple. And each column in that row, usually because it's ordered, you know, the ID is the first column, name might be the second column, age might be the third column. So I'm going to return a tuple, like my ID is 1, 2, 3, my name is Aaron, and my age is, I'm not going to tell you, I'll be embarrassed. So what I want to do is I want to return math floor, and there's a shortcut for this, right? This is also another Python. I can do quantity, and if I do a double divide, that essentially rounds down and gives me the equivalent of math floor, with a couple of exceptions on the way it handles floating points. I think it always returns, or it will return a floating point as opposed to a integer. So let's experiment with that. Hop into my Python command line, and if I need to import math. And if I do math.floor 10/3, I get 3. But if I do 10.0/3, it still gives me 3. But if I do 10/3, it gives me 3. If I do 10.0/3, it gives me 3.0. It sends it back to a floating point type, a decimal type. So that's the only difference, I believe, between math floor, which means round down, and this double divide, which means round down and truncate the decimal. There's what other things like math floor can, I think it can give me 2 decimal places. I'm not sure how to do that. Let me see. That's not going to tell me. Anyway, let's not get too far down that rabbit hole. Anyway, so we've got this share function, and we wanted to return the quantity, the rounded down version of the quantity, and we wanted to also return. So just by using a comma, it can return multiple values. That's something Python can do that most standard programming languages don't have. The ability to return multiple types. JavaScript introduced this recently with destructuring. Java doesn't have this capability. You would need to create an object or return an array. Anyway, how do I get the remainder? Anyone? You can use modulus, which the modulus or the percent operator just returns the remainder. This is probably something you used in your computer science 101 days and haven't used very often since. There's probably other ways to do that that are more complex. Like you could check to see if there's a decimal and then check if the decimal is greater than or less than 0.5 and then return whatever. Actually, you don't even need to do that. Anyway, so now what we need to do is we need to change our tests. The first thing we want to do is, let's see, share portions, should equal 5, 0, meaning there's no remainder. This should return 3, 1. This should return 20 divided by 3. Help me out here. 6 and 2 as the remainder, right? All of this should work. We'll hop back over here and run it from the command line because, frankly, I like that output better. All right, all three of those passed. Great. So we've got a solution here. It seems to be working. Can anyone think of any cases where this wouldn't work? First of all, let's make our first test a little more sane. Def test returns share returns tuple. So what we want to do is assert that the type of share 10, 2 is tuple, or is means is exactly the same thing. It means it is of type. If I can spell it, tuple. All right. Now we have 4 tests. Uh-oh. 1 error during collection. In load and unlock line 14. Share 2 portions. Maybe I want equals here. You got to watch white space in. Oh, I'm missing a parenthesis. Come on, guys. You got to help me with these little mistakes. You know I make them all the time. But you guys should be better at proofreading than me. All right. Now we've got 4 passing tests. And I want to make sure that this can do is tuple as well. Yeah, okay. So it's of type tool. Now, there's another way of doing that. I think it's instance is. Oh, is instance. And then comma tuple. That does the exact same thing, or the effective equivalent. All right. Let's go back to type. I think that's easier to read. All right, so we're doing good here. We could do something like we could optionally return the remainder if there is a remainder. That sounds a little too complex. What I wanted to do was introduce a few more options to Pytest. Like, for instance, we can parameterize our test. So we can use Pytest. You see this @ sign makes it a decorator. A decorator in Python is roughly analogous to a Java annotation. But it's not quite the same. So what I want to do is I want to mark parameterize. And it's not parameterize, it's parameterize. I don't know where they got that from, but. And then you create a string. This is kind of weird. Let's define our, we'll get to that. What we want to do is we want to define our function. Test share variations, we'll call this. Now what we want to do is we want to have our Q and our P and our remainder, and we want to have our expected. Just to make it very obtuse there. So what I want to do is I want to list my arguments as a string, Q, P, R, E. And then I want to return an array. This array will be, it'll run each iteration. Now, what do I want to return, or what do I want to pass? I want to pass a tuple. So I want to say if I have 4 candies and 3 kids, I'm going to have 1 candy and 1 remainder, comma, and then I want to do another version. I want to have, if I have 25 candies and 5 kids, then they should each get, well, they should each get 3 pieces, and then I should keep 10 for the remainder. That's how it normally works out, but this program can't handle that, so there's 0 remainder here. And then they have 100 pieces of candy, and I have 3 kids, then I should get, each should get 33 pieces with only 1 left over for me, which doesn't seem fair. So now I have, each tuple contains my 2 parameters, my expected return values. And maybe what I'll do is I could actually take a tuple as a 3rd parameter, but since I've already got this written out, how do I want to do this? What I want to do is I want to assert that share, share Q comma P quantity times portion is equal to the expected portion size and the remainder, right? This is why you don't use 1-letter variable names. All right, but now I'm testing 3 different scenarios with a single line of code. Well, with 3 lines of code and this parameterized decorator is pretty complex, but let's go ahead and try that. Let's run just this one. Error, Pytest is not defined. Oh, because I need to import Pytest. Now, so far, Pytest is just known. This test method starts with a test. It has an assert. It knows how to interpret this. But because I'm using this Pytest mark parameterized, I need to import that. Let's try this again. And here we go. So now we see we have this passed. Test share variations, 4, 3, 1 apiece, 1 remainder. What I really don't like is that it has a hyphen instead of a comment. This is a Pytest thing, not a Pycharm thing. Bring it here where it's easier to read. And so you can see the variations. And the reason I don't like that is because I'm going to introduce another test that's not going to make sense. Go back to my Pycharm. Because I'm a tester, I think of edge cases, right? Share negatives. Assert, share. What if I have debt? I have -5 pieces of candy and 3 kids. What's going to happen? I don't even know. All right, so assert -2, 1 equals 1, 1. So I don't know how it comes up with this negative number, but we should probably put some checks in here. If quantity less than 1, well we should, do we raise? Need a colon there. Can't divide negative or 0. And I can say or portions less than 1. That should take care of that. What do I do? Is it error? Time to go back to Google and learn how we do Python raise exception. Raise. So I need it. Raise exception and not error. All right, we'll try that. And then the next thing I need to do is Pytest expect exception. With Pytest raises exception. That's what I want to do. Back to my code. Assert share -5, 3. Assert share 5, -3. Just to test them both. Well, I guess I can't test them both here because it's going to raise. This is good enough for now. That passes. If I do this, then it shouldn't raise an exception. And that should fail. Did not raise exception. So how do we check did not raise? Stack Overflow to the rescue. We just do it the hard way. Try, whatever, accept, fail. So we want to try to assert that. Actually, we don't need to assert, we need to try there, and then we need to accept exception. And then what is it? Pytest raise, Pytest fail. All right, test doesn't raise. That succeeds. We want to sanity check it. Remember, you want red, green refactor or green, red refactor. Shouldn't have raised exception. All right. So we'll go back and correct that, and we're golden. All right. So let's just recap here for a minute. We've introduced Pytest, and we've got it running through Pycharm. I'm still not extremely happy how Pycharm works. I guess I'm old school. But anyway, we can create a class We can also move these tests into another file. I don't think we have time for that today, but then I would have to import share and use that. So, but what we can do is we can test something. A Pytest method or function starts with test. Likewise, a Pytest class, if I were to create a class, I would want to use a capital test in the name. We use assert within our Pytest. We can test that it raises an exception. We can also test that it doesn't raise an exception by using a try except block. That's like a try catch block. Raise is like throws for you in Java land. And we can also parameterize our tests. Another thing we could do is we could create a function and we could just we could return all of these parameters, which makes this more manageable. So I'm going to return all this, and then I can do def test parameters. And I still need to pass this parameterized. Cut and paste that. And add these values here. Now I can take this ugly thing out and I can just call this method, which makes this a lot more manageable, especially if I'm getting these from a file or creating a bigger collection here. There's one last thing I want to point out, and that's that we can do this an alternate way. What I can do is I can turn this parameters into a Pytest fixture. And then I can do, here, let's do our cut and paste again, just so we don't lose those. Pytest fixture. So I'm using this decorator to label this this as a fixture. And what I can then do, instead of this mark parameterize, I can pass in my fixture as my one argument. Just the name of the method, not the calling the method with the parentheses. But what it does is it's going to come into an object called data, or data in fixture. So I'm actually going to put it into this data object. I could also call this scenario. Now what I want to do is I want to do that. Actually, not for scenario. Let's do data, because this is each instance. What I would do is I would do q equals data sub 0. The first argument, d portion equal e equals data sub 2, and remainder equals data sub 3. So it's returning this. It's returning the fixture as an array, not as a tuple. And then I'll call this test fixture. Oops. And that worked. Now, if I have a failure baked in, remember we always sanity check our tests. Let me back in. All right, we'll bring out the project window. So say I have an error here in this one. When I run the fixture before, you couldn't really tell. Let me do it from the command line because it is, again, easier to see there. So I just have test fixture passed. I don't know what happened like with parameters, which kind of makes me like parameterized more. But if I change this and I run this again now, passing in the fixture, then you'll see here's my fixture, and here's my error. Expected 5, 0, it equals 5, 5. And you can see that again from the command line. Assert 5, 0 equals 5, 5. It's expecting 5, 0 because there should be no remainder. So that's about it for Pytest right now. There's a lot more to explore. The next thing we'll try and do is we'll continue with Pytest, and we'll go back to using that sample REST API framework to actually use Pytest to write Python tests exercising a REST API, which is what this class is all about. We're just kind of doing a little bit of foundational work these first 2 weeks. But thank you, everyone. And if you have any comments, let's go ahead and go through right now. Let's see, we've got quite a few people who showed up while I was talking. Good to see. Amit, do you have any comments or questions?
Not now, Aaron. I will look into this and then we'll ask in next session if any.
Okay, great. Thank you. Divya, do you have any?
No, Aaron, thank you so much for this session. Please provide recording to us.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'll try and get better. Twice I've screwed up the recording out of my classes. Mahesh, any questions or comments?
No, not as of now. This is my first class, so trying to grasp a few things.
Were you able to follow along? I know our first class, we went through setup with everyone. So has this been okay for you?
Not quite a bit. I also joined a little bit late, but I will try to make up the earlier things. If you can just share the previous recording, I can catch up to the next classes.
Sure, yeah. We also have a Slack channel, and I'll post the source for the videos in the Slack channel. And again, I've been saying for almost 2 weeks now, I'll have a mailing list up, but I don't have a mailing list or a registration form. But we'll eventually get the mailing list, and there'll be a class page or forum somewhere under training.oneshore.com. So probably, like python.tests or training.oneshore.com/Python API test, something like that. I'll create that. There'll be a landing page that'll contain the ability to register for the class, see the schedule, view the past videos, and to be able to post questions and interact with everyone, as well as for the link to Slack channel and all. That's my goal, to work on that. I'd love to be able to carve out some more time, but doing the classes is taking a lot more time than I thought. Okay, Mohammed, do you have any questions or comments?
Hi, no, everything is clear and good. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Parth, any questions or comments from you?
No, thank you.
All right. Samia.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Who is that?
Hello?
Hello. Is this Samia?
Yeah, yes, this is me. No, thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, you're welcome. Sky.
Aaron, thank you, and I'll look into it. I'll do it, work out, and let you know if I have any questions.
All right, thanks a lot, everyone. I hope this was useful, and I hope that we'll be able to get to more information in the future to help you testing REST APIs and web services with Python. Have a good day. Have a good weekend. Well, it's not.
Thank you.
It feels like weekend for me already. But have a good night for those of you in Asia. And take care.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
day.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.